And the living entity, or Jiva in Sanskrit, material nature, time, and fruitive activities. So we're going to be discussing what Bhagavad Gita says about these, briefly, so in introduction fashion. And we'll start up here with the living entity, and then material nature and so forth. So there's a nice little drawing of the first topic. A happy living entity, that's us. And the teaching of Bhagavad Gita is that the living entity, or the soul, or ourselves and our true spiritual identity have these natural characteristics of being eternal, the source of consciousness, and by nature, you can see that smiling person there, blissful. However, the living entity, or the soul, when coming in contact with matter, becomes covered by a subtle body. This is Bhagavad Gita's teaching. These subtle features that cover the soul are mind, intelligence, and false ego, progressively subtle, more subtle, and most subtle. And then there's another covering, a gross body, that covers the subtle body and the soul. And there's these 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether, or space. So it's something like a jewel inside an envelope, and that envelope is inside another envelope, or covering. And this is who we are. However, when the coverings, subtle body, gross body, are covering the soul, we forget who we are, and we identify with the feelings in our mind, or the intelligent thoughts that we have, or the body that's covering the subtle body, when in fact our real identity is a soul. So here's an artist's rendering of something that helps get a picture of the soul. This is a painting of a patient who is undergoing heart surgery. There's a number of books. Dr. Michael Sabum from Emory University is one author who is a heart surgeon by profession and also professor at Emory. And while performing open heart surgery of a patient, the patient had the experience of cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest means the heart stops. When the heart stops, blood doesn't go to the brain. And when that happens, there's a procedure. They see these little gadgets, they say, the heart has stopped, so they pull out some electrodes and place the electrodes on the chest to stimulate the heart to beat artificially, so that maybe kind of like jump starting a car, it'll start up again on its own. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So this particular patient survived, and the next day or two, when Dr. Sabum went to see his patient, he asked his patient, how are you? And the patient said, I'm fine. And the patient started describing what happened during cardiac arrest. And he described that he was floating up above the operation table, looking down upon his body, and the assistant said to the doctor, that said to the nurse, different things, and the procedures, and details and details and details. Observing from above the operating table his own body lying on the operating table, and in details that were accurate. And Dr. Sabum thought, gee, this is ridiculous. It's not possible. Because from a medical point of view, consciousness is electrochemical events that take place in the neurological system, and the synapses are within the brain. That's what consciousness is. And so when blood stops going into the brain, consciousness stops, because electrochemical events stop. So the electrochemical events, they had stopped, but here was the conscious person, separate from the body and separate from the brain, observing the body. So that's a no-no for medical science. So he decided, I want to find out what's the explanation behind this. And 12 years later he published a book, because he found out there were other heart surgeons and then he himself had other patients who reported what's called out-of-body experiences. They have an acronym, OBE, out-of-body experience. So the point is, keep it simple, can keep within our time, the seat of consciousness is not the body. Seat of consciousness is something else, and after 12 years, Michael Sabum wrote, I hate to say this, I mean, medical doctors aren't supposed to say this, but evidence points to the conscious self is something other than the body, which is what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. Who we are is not the body. That's chapter 2, Bhagavad Gita. And in chapter 2, Krishna gives qualities of the soul that indicate its non-physical aspect. For example, the soul can't be cut to pieces, so it's not earth. Can't be burned by fire, it's not made of fire. Can't be moistened by water, can't be withered by the wind, it's not material. The individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and eternally the same. The soul is invisible, inconceivable, and immutable. So this is some information found in chapter 2 Bhagavad Gita about the qualities of the soul. And so the soul, the conscious self, this is transmigration, or after leaving the soul, passing through the different stages of life. After this life it passes on to another body and continues in rotation. That's reincarnation is a concept discussed in Bhagavad Gita. And so the covering of the soul, the gross and subtle coverings, that's this material nature. So we're now on topic number 2 of 5. So Sanskrit word is Prakriti, and the meaning is material nature. And according to Bhagavad Gita, actually there are more verses in Bhagavad Gita discussing this topic than any other topic, because it's a little complicated. There are 3 modes of nature. That's these 3 ladies that are like puppeteers: yellow, red, and blue. Like, the primary colors. And you mix the primary colors and you can make any color. Similarly, there's 3 modes of nature, and you mix the 3 modes of nature, you get all varieties within material nature. Varieties of people, varieties of mentalities, varieties of species, varieties of cultures, varieties of everything, based upon these 3 modes. And there's, of course, lots of detail. Then down here, that's us thinking, I'm the supervisor and I'm the laborer, when in fact we're all being operated under the direction of these modes of nature. And then there's one who is supervising those modes of nature. This is an artist's rendering of those same material elements. You remember those earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And then there's the subtle elements, mind, intelligence, false ego. They're being carried, the soul, that's this one, this spark, is being carried by the material elements through space. And side by side with the soul, there's this other supreme soul. We're going to mention that a little bit later. It's just an artist's rendering, graphically depicting what bodies are made of, and the conscious self is something distinct. Oops. Another verse from Bhagavad Gita is teaching that the senses, so sight, smell, sound, touch, and taste, the five senses. They're like horses, and they're pulling the chariot, the body made of two wheels, that's karma. And then there's the steering mechanism for the horses, that's the mind. And over here, that's the intelligence that's giving direction to the mind, who's giving direction to the horses. And there's this terrified passenger inside. That's a living entity going for a ride on the chariot of the senses, the mind, the intelligence, and then the two wheels of karma. We're going to touch on karma in a moment too. That's one of the five topics. Out of the different species of life that the soul transmigrates or moves into, especially rare and significant is the human form of life. This is a verse from Bhagavad Gita that's teaching this point, that the human form of life, which is, although rare and temporary, it gives the opportunity for achieving the fullness of consciousness. Okay, so far we've touched on, lightly, two topics of five. The living entity, the conscious self, the covering, gross and subtle, made of material nature, and how they mix. Then here comes the third topic, and you're familiar with the term karma. Anyone not familiar with the term karma? You're all familiar. Somewhat. Well, it's a little artist illustration, the cause and effect. It's like dominoes, or if you push this one, it falls down, it knocks over that one. That one knocks down, you falls over on that one, and so forth, and then guess what happens when it comes around here? It's going to fall on the guy's head. Although he's just pressing over here. Something over here is going to happen. There's a little, I hope nobody's offended by British humor. There's a little video clip made by some British folks that they want to explain karma. This causes that, causes that, causes that, causes that, causes that, and it comes back. You ready? It's a different kind of humor. Anyway, here we go. Look out, here comes a truck. British humor. This causes that, causes that, causes that, causes that, and it comes back. So it's similar, the law of karma is not the same, but similar to Newton's third law. That says for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So that means when you do actions that are acts of kindness to others, that kindness comes back to you. When you do an act that causes pain and suffering to other living entities, that pain and suffering comes back to you. And you can't neutralize it. Supposing you did something bad. Accidentally you do something bad. It's going to come, the reaction is going to come. And it may not, here's a description of how, it's not necessarily immediately. Maybe it's before your time, but when the Beatles had a song called Instant Karma. Familiar with that one? Instant karma. So there's some karma that boom, boom, action, reaction. But sometimes it's delayed. And the delay is described sometimes by comparing the seeds that are sitting there in an apple, the potential of another apple tree is within each seed. So that's like this term here, bija, or in seed. And then some are being fully manifested. They're like falling from the tree, ripe. That's this one, prarabdha karma. And some are not yet manifested. So these are Sanskrit terms, not directly within Bhagavad Gita, but it's some details of, there's different types of karma. Some that are not yet manifested, some that are presently manifested, some that are in a seed form, and this other term, kuta, is just like a propensity, a general proclivity towards work in a particular type, like good or bad work. And here's a timeline, just to give an idea, where sometimes the smaller circles are, there's fructification of something good or bad that comes back quickly. Sometimes it's a bigger cycle of time, sometimes it's a really big cycle of time, sometimes it's an even bigger cycle of time. So it's not like something that happened one moment ago is necessarily going to fructify today, or what's happening this moment could be from several lifetimes previously. So these red lines indicate, a lifetime. So someone takes birth in this lifetime, and they're doing things. So during that lifetime, they're generating new karma. Again, some may fructify quickly, some at a later period of time, like that. So that's when some misfortune comes our way, we may wonder, gee, where did that misfortune come from? And it may not necessarily even be in this life, of some bad deed brings a bad fortune. Now, that's 3 topics already. 2 more to go. There's someone that's supervising or overseeing this, the actions that we do, and the living entity's desires for finding happiness and so on. So that's Ishvara, or the Supreme Absolute Truth. So here's a definition of what the Supreme Absolute Truth is. That which is the source of everything. That's a simple definition. That from which everything comes. Those of you from India, you probably know this phrase from Vedanta Sutra. Janmad yasya yataha is the first aphorism or phrase from Vedanta Sutra that says, the absolute truth is that from which everything comes, the cause of all other causes that bring about effects that later may become the cause of the next effect, and so on. The original cause, that whatever that is, that's the absolute truth. And because the absolute truth is the cause or source, therefore the absolute truth is the proprietor. And because the absolute truth is the proprietor, it's the absolute truth, or the supreme person, is the supreme enjoyer. And that same supreme enjoyer is overseeing material nature. And material nature is awarding the good and the bad and so forth that happens to us. But we're making choices, and based on our choices, we're determining our own destiny, or we're building our own karma. And going quickly here because it's just a summary, each of these topics are explored in depth within Bhagavad Gita. There's a nice meaning for those of you that have some idea of Eastern philosophy or Eastern wisdom. Within that supreme, there's fullness of opulence. Like, for example, in this world, there's some people that are very wealthy. Think of some names of some people that are very wealthy. What's the fellow that... Bill Gates. Warren Buffett. There's some people in China that are really mega wealthy too. So, and some people in India. And so, somewhere there's somebody really wealthy. And then somewhere there's somebody more wealthy, and somebody more wealthy, and somebody more wealthy. But no one can claim they have all wealth, But that which is, or he who is the possessor of all wealth, that's the Supreme. And someone is famous, Michael Jackson, or some, movie star, or some, politician, and something, something, something. But, someone more famous, and everyone knows God, so he's the possessor of all fame. But this is a definition from the Vedic literature. Someone in this world, people revere knowledge, and somewhere there's somebody that has more knowledge and more knowledge and more knowledge, and the possessor of all knowledge in full, that's Ishvara, or the Supreme. So that Ishvara is situated, as the illustration showed, within the heart. Along with the living entity, there's a witness. And I wanted to have this diagram, but I don't have it, so I'll just say it. There's a statement not within Bhagavad Gita, but within similar literature, a metaphor, that it's like having two birds in a tree, and one bird is jumping from branch to branch, enjoying the fruits on the tree. Another bird is not, but just observing the jumping bird. And the jumping one is us, trying to be the enjoyer of the fruits of our activities. And the other bird, Ishvara, the Supreme Conscious Being, situated within each of our bodies, the same one within all of us, is the witness. He's the knower, he's observing, and according to the type of activity that we perform, there's some karma that accrues to us for those activities. And this is a painting of, so the Supreme Person, according to the message of Bhagavad Gita, is situated in the vastness of the spiritual sky, within which there's a cloud, and an expansion of him is there to oversee all these little orbs, are universes. According to the Vedic picture, there's not just this one universe, there's unlimited numbers of universes, and living entities are occupying bodies within the planets within each of these universes, and there's the Supreme. So that's one of the 5 topics of Bhagavad Gita. And then the last of the 5 is something that's very fascinating, and that's time. Time is an energy, a spiritual force that both brings things into being and maintains things for some time, and then time also destroys everything. It's invisible, right? We haven't. You can look at your watch and say, there's tick, 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 and that's time. It's a measurement of time, but the force of time is something else. It's an energy that's from the Supreme, and it brings creation about. It makes things happen, just like, here we are. We're sitting in the sacred space. And somewhere before, we were somewhere else. And when we're done, we're going to go somewhere else. So we require time for activity on this plane. And so time is a topic, one of the 5 essential topics, because without time, you don't have anything. You don't have any material anything. You don't have activity. You don't have birth. You don't have aging. You don't have school. You don't have exams. Yay. You don't have anything. Time is required. And so time is under Krishna's direction, and how that time works to help move things around is one of the topics in Bhagavad Gita. So that's a very quick summary. Again, here's the picture of Krishna. After Arjuna hears the message of Bhagavad Gita, he's ready to follow the direction that Krishna gives. And so then that part of Bhagavad Gita is over.